God, this is bringing back some memories from last year. Believe it or not, we are finally onto insulating. So we're going to roll out this loft insulation up on top of our membrane that we put in yesterday. So we've got that vapor barrier, then battens, plasterboard will be under that. These are pre-cut at 600 centres. We've run a saw through the roll. Craig is going to go across the middle of the trusses, and then we're going to roll it this way. Hi, it was me. I make the noise. So this is what it's looking like from yesterday. It's pretty taut, but the weight of the insulation will sit down a bit, but that's fine. We've got the battens there to hold it up anyway. We've got two options. We've got 200mm and 100mm loft insulation. We could do 100mm between and then 200 that way, but we're a little bit tight on kind of space in between the trusses and also where we put the bracing in. Or we could put 200 in first, kind of knit them together over the top of this bottom cord, and then where we can, where it's deeper, get the 100mm in perpendicular to that. And I think that's the route we're going to go. So if I feed it to you, go under there, yeah, and then we'll just have to stop on top of that. It's never 200 to start with anyway, because it needs fluffing up. So. It's actually turning out all right. We're going to go 200 across as planned. Of course, when it comes out of the roll, it's a little bit compressed, so that's quite handy because we can get it underneath that brace and then fluff it up after. So the idea is we're going to come back in here, we're going to replace the first section here with a rigid insulation, just so we've got airflow over the top of it and we're not, you know, getting in the way and blocking our airflow. Obviously the membrane we're using is good in that it's breathable anyway, so the whole thing becomes vented, but I just need this membrane on. So we're at the bottom part of the membrane, we can fold back when we need to. We're just going to snap a chalk line now that carries on this line all the way to the end. But yeah. Go on then, you have to ping it your end. God, this is bringing back some memories from last year. Well, we're a week on, the sun is still out, but it's not quite as hot as it was when we were doing the first side. We've got to get this membrane, the vapor barrier up, we've got to get the insulation in, and we've got to get the membrane and battens done today. We are away next week, and I don't really want it pooling up with water because we've had a few issues over the last couple of days with the rain. You can see this side is membraned. We've got to do the same the other side. First thing I've got to do is get all the insulation out see what we've got left. I think I ordered enough 200, so we've ended up with 400mm of insulation in the loft, which is absolutely loads. Pretty sure that's up there in amongst the highest level of static caravan insulated roofs, but the 100s are not going to be wasted. They're going to be used for internal walls if needed, just for soundproofing. Like I mentioned earlier, the one problem with soft insulation is because it's so deep, where you get to the eaves, you end up restricting airflow if you're not careful. So we will be cutting back the last little bit of the loft insulation and installing a block of PIR, which will probably be around 500, 600mm by 600mm. And that would just mean that we've got a decent airflow above, but we're not compromising on the insulation. But that will mean that we haven't got a cold spot along the outer corner eaves ceiling of each room, which is where you could get condensation and things like that. My next job this afternoon is to get the rafters cut. Remember, we've got trusses one end down there, which have got thinner timbers than what we have got this end. We've also left these long, so we need to cut these back to the same line, which is the easy part. And then we need to cut these plumb. Going to go along with spirit level now, run a line down so we've got a nice plumb cut all the way along, and then I'll cut them all before we put the membrane on. So I was mid-edit and I realised I hadn't really gone into much detail on the build-up of the roof. So I've headed down to do the chores this evening, and I thought I'd give you a bit of a walk around to explain some of the choices I made, some of the bits that probably skipped in the video, and hopefully give you an insight into how this roof build-up is going to work. So believe it or not, for the first time in a while, we've actually been on holiday. Only a 3-day break, but we went out the country and it was good to know that the roof was covered. But it took a little bit of thinking and a little bit of perseverance to get it to that point. So if I start from the underside and work up, this end is the really easy end because this end is just a conventional cut roof, albeit that it's very shallow. So we've got the rafters that is sat on our wall plate, sitting up on our big ridge beams, and everything is going to be done from underneath. So we're just going to have insulation boards fit between and under, and then plasterboard, and it's kind of how you would imagine a loft conversion, for example. So from this point onwards, it's all the bedrooms, bathrooms, study, that sort of thing, and we've gone for the truss roof. The main action happened from above. It would be very hard in such shallow trusses to get up in there and do anything. One thought I had right early on is I could have put these trusses on, probably brought them either this vapor barrier or a membrane up the side as well, so that when they were split, the insulation would stay where it should be, and use a loose fill insulation. That way it would have got in and around all those timbers within the trusses and possibly done a better job than what we had to do. We used conventional off-the-shelf products for the roof, so the Loft roll is a normal mineral wool insulation, and they're pretty cut, so they fit, as you saw, nicely between the trusses. Because we needed to have more than the 200mm that came on the roll, we doubled up. Normally, if your trusses were steep enough, there was enough space in between all the cords, all the timbers, you'd be able to run the second layer perpendicular, normal loft insulation method. We couldn't really do that here. We managed to get one perpendicular near the ridge, but the rest we just ended up doing 2 layers running between the trusses, and then just tried to knit them together so that all the timbers, the ceiling timbers, were covered, if that makes sense. Anyway, coming through into this half, probably got all sorts of weird white balance going on with the camera, but you can see how it's looking now from under here. We've ended up with normal 2.4 meter ceilings, which makes it feel far less cabin-like than it could do if they were short, if they were lower and the rooms were as small as they're going to be. It could feel pretty tight. So we went with full height ceilings. It's also going to be easier when it comes to putting plasterboard and wall finishes, up. Hopefully less cutting. So first thing we did is got this vapor barrier up. Now, because of the insulation that's up there and we've got a really well vented roof, there's not as much of a worry of condensation. We could have left it breathable. But there's 2 reasons for using the vapor barrier. One is it's a great way of cutting down on drafts, increasing air tightness. So it means that the building as a whole is going to be more airtight. Ventilation we'll talk about in a future video, but as much as the thermal part of the build is important, so is the air tightness. So using our OSB on the walls, which is not airtight, but it's pretty decent when it comes to air permeability. We're going to be taping all the joins. We're going to be taping the transition between the ceiling and the wall on the floor. So we are pretty much, airtight. The windows, there can be a lot of detailing around that as well. A lot of this is just a playground for different ideas and techniques that we can carry through into the main house build in the future. So probably a little bit over the top for a cabin. But really we're trying to treat this as a sort of timber frame single-story house, rather than thinking of it as a temporary cabin build. So the vapor barrier does that, but also we are using a corrugated steel roof. So there is more chance of condensation than most other roof coverings. So the less opportunity for moisture from within the building to get up in there and cause issues, the better. I'll talk about the roof covering in a little bit, but next thing to go on were the battens. The battens are running at 600 sensors, and they will carry our ceiling boards. Probably going to be plasterboard rather than paneling or cladding, and I think if I can get away with it 9mm, should be okay at 600 sensors, probably better at 400, but that will go in first. I'm thinking that we'll put the plasterboard ceiling up, then the walls, and that gives a little bit of flexibility afterwards and may just make it for an easier, quicker install. But if there's any downsides to that, they can always happen after. And then through to this side, same deal, through here, all ready for ceiling boards. I think we dropped a hammer here, so a little bit to tape, but apart from that, all good. Right, back out into this end. One of the most important parts of a roof when you're doing it like this is going to be the roof membrane, because one, it's going to give you your protection during the construction phase, i.e. right now when we've got no roof on there, we were able to go away for a few days and not have to worry too much. So it is a waterproof or weatherproof covering, but also it's there as your belts and braces, is your backup, because if you've got a tile fail, a slate fail, or any other, or even condensation forming, it's not going to get down into your insulation and your timbers and cause issues. So it was important to get a good quality one. Roof Shield we've worked with in the past. We produced a video maybe a year and a half ago when I re-roofed the last house. It's a great one because it's not just breathable and kind of weatherproof, it's actually air permeable. So that worry about having that constant airflow uninterrupted from eaves all the way up to ridge or eaves to eaves is not as much of a worry when you've got an air permeable membrane, because the whole roof becomes vented. So although we always are going to have an air gap here, it just means that there's much less chance of any issues throughout the whole roof. And when it came to the battens, instead of using a normal 25mm roofing batten, every course, because we're using a corrugated roof, we're going up to a thicker, beefier timber, more like a purlin. Our spacings could have been much bigger had it not been for our ceiling below. But anyway, this is what we're using. So it's about 45mm thick. So we've got much more of an air gap, which is handy for ventilation. But also, we're only using these at 1.2 metre spacings or metre spacings. So we only actually have we have 4 of these up the roof. So there'll be 4 rows of fixings to get those sheets down. Right, everything is blue, green and pasty, so I'm going to go outside. We did have a bit of a nightmare along the way, I won't lie. We had just endless days of sunshine and dry weather. It was all going happy days with the roof. Then we knew that rain was on the way, so I decided to come here one evening and roll out some of this. This is Frame Shield, which is a wall version of what we're using on the roof. I've got this in 2.7 metre rolls. Great. Roll it over the other side and the whole roof will be covered. It's not weatherproof. Well, it was heavy rain when I came to check, and the rain was hitting it and almost like a light mist was falling inside. So yes, on a wall, we don't seem to be having any issues at all, but in a near horizontal surface, it's just no way near as weatherproof as the roof shield that we've got up there. So don't try and cut corners like me. But it was only up there for the day, and then I came and sorted it out the next day. But it did lead to a few soggy patches. Let's ascend the hill and I'll show you how it's looking from up there. Actually, I'm going to end up with grass seeds all in my socks. Here's a look at what it's looking like up here. So there's a few bits to finish, but you can see just those 3 timbers are acting as our battens. Centre one, or both the top 2 are on joins on the overlaps. So we've used 1.5 metre roof shield, then another 1.5 metre, and then 1 metre at the ridge. If I come around to this side, this is how it should be looking, the other side. So we've got our kind of membrane felt carrier eaves starter trays, whatever we're calling them. That is there to sit into the gutter and start us off. Remember, this is quite a bright coloured roofing membrane, so you don't want that flapping around and being visible, in your gutter or at the gutter level. So they're in, and you can see all these rafters here are now cut down to match the end of our trusses. The only thing I am going to have to do is put some extra timbers underneath to carry our soffits. One last thing I haven't mentioned is Tom was here on the last day helping, and you might be able to see above me, he built out these ladders on the end. They're not coming out too far, but they're just coming out enough to match our overhang at the eaves. So I've just got to replicate that down the other end. That would just give a bit more of a feature and also a little bit more protection for our cladding. Again, if it was just a speed thing, could have kept it flush with the end, used our barge board trims, the L trims, just slap them on and be done with it. A little bit like on the big barn behind you. In theory and in speed, probably would have gone for trusses all the way along. The only issue there is you don't really get that big open plan space. And the reason for that is because we have to build in 2 halves. And if you split them, your trusses would have had to sit on something. We couldn't have used a full truss that would have sat from side to side. And if we had gone mono trusses all the way along, somehow or another we would have had to have a wall down the middle to carry those trusses, or if it was a beam, it would be much lower. So it might have been possible, but hindsight's a great thing. But like everything with this project, it's not about taking the easy route. Some of it could have been done in a cheaper way, quicker way, but this is more than just a quick fix. This needs to be somewhere that we're going to live and be comfortable for a few years. And also gives us this opportunity, which is quite rare, if you're going into doing a self-build or a barn conversion or whatever, to be able to spend time hands-on with different materials and techniques and tools and that sort of thing on a trial project ahead of your main build is a big plus. A lot of people who build their one-off dream self-build house, the first time they get to experiment, or not even experiment, the first time they get to use and implement different materials is at the actual main project, and that's where you can't really learn because it's too late. So there are things we've learnt on this that we would or wouldn't do, and we'll kind of digest that in the future, I guess. But it's, you know, it's a good chance for us to do that. And you could do the same thing if you were doing a garden building, garden office, gym in the garden or whatever, and you're planning an extension a year later. Try out different things. Window manufacturers, for example, sheep's wool, wood fibre boards, all those things we probably wouldn't have ever been able to play around with until the big build. So yeah, it's all a plus. One last thing, we've been gathering our Q&A content for a video that Joe and I are going to film, mainly on the cabin, but on a whole range of other things. We're going to be filming that tomorrow. There should just be time to squeak in a few more questions, so if you've got any and you want them to be included in that video, stick them down in the comments below and we'll get to them then. My arm's nearly falling off with this big camera, and I've got a load of pigs to feed and the dog's chewing my feet. Thank you to all of you for keeping up with us on this and keeping the support going that way. It's good to hear everyone's comments and all the feedback we get, because it's pretty solitary sometimes this end. So yeah, it's good to bounce ideas off people. Anyway, thank you again to everyone, Patreon, Instagram. It's really great to have that following. And of course to Speedy for sponsoring this series. But there we go, thanks for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time.